I lit the last lantern in the east wing. The house was always cold, but that night it just felt still. My shift started at midnight. The bell rope upstairs hadn't moved in years, or so they said. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard it. One soft ring, no footsteps, no wind, just one ring. And that's when the first rule started to matter. If you're still awake, subscribe, and tell me in the comments below that where are you tuning in from. October 15th, 1869. I have accepted employment as night keeper at Thornwick Palace, situated upon the cliffs overlooking the North Sea. The wages are considerable, £4 per week, more than I earned in 3 months at the Manchester Mill, though I suspect there are reasons for such generosity that I have yet to comprehend. The advertisement in the Times was peculiar. Night keeper required, Thornwick Estate. Must be named Thomas. Experience unnecessary. Permanent position available. The journey from Liverpool required 6 hours by carriage along coastal roads that grew increasingly desolate. My driver, a weathered man named Hobbs, spoke freely until we reached the final mile, when he fell silent and began crossing himself repeatedly. When I inquired about the palace's reputation, he responded only with, "The bell tower, sir. Mind you stay clear of the bell tower after dark." Mr. Cranfield met me at the servants' entrance as twilight descended. He is a man of perhaps 60 years, immaculately dressed despite the hour, with pale eyes that seemed to look through rather than at me. His handshake was cold enough to sting, even through my gloves. "Welcome to Thornwick, Mr. Whitmore," he said, though I had not yet provided my name. "You are precisely what we require." He provided me with 7 brass keys on an iron ring, each marked with symbols rather than words. A door, a staircase, a wine glass, a cross, an eye, a mirror, and a bell. Along with these came a whale oil lantern and a leather-bound journal titled "Instructions for the Night Keeper" in faded gold script. "You are to record everything in this ledger," he informed me. The previous keeper maintained meticulous records. His observations proved invaluable. The journal contains 7 rules written in different inks, as though added over time. 1. Patrol all rooms on the ground floor between 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock each night. 2. Use only whale oil for illumination, never candles, gas, or electric light. 3. The Great Hall doors must remain locked from sunset to sunrise. 4. This rule has been violently scratched out, the paper torn in places. 5. Do not speak to Lady Margaret if she appears. 6. All mirrors must be covered or turned during sleeping hours. 7. The bell rope in the attic must never be touched by living hands, beneath the rules in handwriting that grows increasingly erratic. Additional instructions manifest as needed. The house teaches those who serve. Mr. Cranfield departed without explanation, though he paused at the door to say, "The bell has remained silent for 12 years, Mr. Whitmore. We require a keeper who can maintain this silence." His emphasis on my surname was deliberate, as though my name itself was a qualification. I have examined my quarters, a modest chamber beside the kitchen with a single window overlooking the courtyard. The previous occupant left hastily. Clothes still hang in the wardrobe, personal effects scatter the washstand, and the bed appears slept in. Most disturbing, someone has nailed shut the small mirror above the washstand, driving iron nails through the glass itself. Hidden beneath the mattress, I discovered a second journal, identical to my official record, filled with entries in a trembling hand. The final page reads, October 14th, 1857. They are teaching me to ring the bell. I can hear my own voice calling from the tower, though I have not spoken. The rules change when you are not watching. I must warn. The sentence ends abruptly, a splash of dark stain obscuring the final words. The palace itself defies architectural logic. Built 40 years past by Lord Ellingwood following his return from colonial service in India, it incorporates Eastern elements that create disturbing optical illusions. Corridors seem to stretch longer at night. Doorways appear in walls where none existed before, and the carved elephants supporting the main staircase occasionally appear to have turned their heads. I write this by lantern light as the clock strikes midnight. The silence here is absolute. No sounds of settling wood, no whisper of wind, no distant murmur of the sea. Yet from somewhere high above comes the faint, rhythmic creak of rope against wood, as though something heavy sways in the bell tower. The previous keeper's name was also Thomas Whitmore. According to the hidden journal, so was his predecessor, and the keeper before that. October 16th, 1869. Rule 1 violated. I left my patrol early. Last night's rounds revealed disturbing inconsistencies between the palace's day and night configurations. I began at 10 o'clock precisely, following the prescribed route through rooms that seemed subtly altered from my afternoon inspection. The drawing room contained furniture arrangements I had not observed earlier, chairs positioned in a perfect circle, as though for a séance, with 13 wine glasses arranged on the central table. Each glass contained a different liquid: red wine, clear spirits, water, and substances I could not identify. One glass held what appeared to be ash mixed with oil, forming a gray paste that seemed to move when observed peripherally. In the library, I discovered that several shelves had been completely rearranged. Books I had catalogued that afternoon now occupied different positions, and new volumes had appeared. The Preservation of Consciousness After Death, Colonial Burial Rites of the Indian Subcontinent, and most disturbing, The Bell Towers of England, a study in supernatural communication. The dining room's long table was set for exactly 13 people, though dust covered 11 place settings. 2 chairs showed evidence of recent use: the head of the table and the seat immediately to its right. Fresh breadcrumbs scattered around these positions, and the wine glasses contained residue that was still wet. Above the head chair hung a portrait I had not seen before: a woman in an emerald dress with eyes that seemed to track my movement. A brass nameplate read, Lady Margaret Ellingwood, 1837 to 1849. Yet according to the previous keeper's hidden journal, Lady Margaret drowned in 1837 and was never painted. The ballroom presented the most troubling discovery. Despite the October warmth, the chamber was cold enough to freeze my breath, and ice crystals had formed intricate patterns on the windows, patterns that resembled Sanskrit text. At the room's far end, a door I had found locked that afternoon now stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I glimpsed stone steps descending into darkness, with walls carved in the same Sanskrit script. The air that flowed from this opening carried scents of sandalwood and something else: the sweet, cloying odor of decay, masked by preservative chemicals. As I approached the door to investigate, I heard footsteps descending the hidden staircase. Not the heavy boots of a workman, but the light click of women's shoes with metal reinforcements. The footsteps paused at what must have been the bottom of the stairs, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock. I pressed my ear to the gap and heard a voice speaking in what sounded like Hindi, followed by responses in English with an upper-class accent. The preparations continue as scheduled. The newest keeper shows promise. Another voice, speaking with my own inflection, replied, I understand. I will teach him the proper methods. This second voice was my own, yet I stood alone in the ballroom. I retreated immediately, abandoning my patrol 2 hours early, a violation of the first rule. Upon returning to my quarters, I discovered my boots caked with red clay, though I had not left the palace. More disturbing, my coat pocket contained a small brass bell, no larger than a thimble, that chimed softly when moved, despite the absence of any clapper. The tiny bell grows warm when held, and its chiming seems to harmonize with the distant creaking from the tower above. I have hidden it in my trunk, though I fear concealment may prove futile. This morning, Mr. Cranfield inquired specifically about my patrol duration. When I confessed to ending early, his reaction was immediate and visceral. His face drained of color, and his hands began trembling so violently he dropped his teacup. "You must never alter the schedule," he whispered. "The house expects punctuality. When patterns are broken, the rules adapt." He departed without further explanation, but I noticed he walked with the careful steps of someone carrying great weight, and his shadow on the wall appeared to lag slightly behind his movement. The tiny bell has begun chiming on its own, always at precisely 10 minutes past each hour. Each time it rings, I hear my own voice echoing faintly from the direction of the bell tower, though I remain silent in my chamber. October 17th, 1869. Rule 2 violated. I used candles for illumination. During last night's patrol, my whale oil lantern failed in the music room, not gradually, but with sudden completeness, as though something had extinguished the flame from within. The wick appeared intact, the oil reservoir full, yet no amount of adjustment could rekindle the light. Rather than stumble through darkness or abandon my duties, I lit several candles from the drawing room's candelabra. The beeswax flames burned with unusual intensity, casting sharp shadows that seemed to move independently of the flickering light. Colors appeared more vivid. The deep red of velvet drapes became the color of fresh blood. The gold leaf on picture frames gleamed like molten metal. Most disturbing, the candlelight revealed details invisible under whale oil illumination. In the music room, the pianoforte's keys bore fresh fingerprints despite the thick dust coating the rest of the instrument. Sheet music lay open to a composition titled Requiem for the Living, written in a hand I recognized as my own, though I have no memory of musical composition. When I tested several keys, the piano produced sounds that echoed from multiple locations throughout the palace, as though other instruments responded in harmony from rooms I knew to be empty. The melody that emerged was complex and mournful, and I found myself playing notes I did not consciously choose, my fingers moving with practiced skill I do not possess. As the music played, I became aware of an audience. In the reflection of the pianoforte's polished surface, I saw them clearly. Men in nightkeeper uniforms standing in precise formation behind me. All bore my face, but showed different ages and states of preservation, some appearing alive, others bearing the translucent quality of long preservation. The eldest figure stepped forward in the reflection and spoke in my voice, though aged and hollow. "Thomas, you understand now. The candles show truth. The house has been teaching us for 40 years. The others nodded in unison, and I realized they were all Thomas Whitmore, every keeper who had served before me. When I turned to face them directly, the room was empty, but their voices continued speaking in perfect harmony. The bell calls to us each night. Soon you will learn to answer. The candlelight flickered, and for a moment, I saw my own reflection aged and transparent among theirs. From somewhere high above came the sound I had dreaded, a single, clear tone from the bell tower, not the wild ringing of wind-blown bronze, but the deliberate, measured toll of someone pulling the rope with practiced precision. The sound seemed to emanate from the candle, flames themselves, growing louder until it filled the entire palace. Pictures rattled in their frames, wine glasses in the dining room chimed in harmony, and every mirror in the building began to resonate with the same pure tone. I extinguished the candles immediately and fled to my quarters, but the damage was done. The tiny brass bell in my trunk was chiming frantically, and when I opened the chest, I found dozens more, small bells scattered throughout my belongings, each one warm to the touch and ringing in perfect harmony with the tower bell above. This morning, I discovered that my journal had been altered. The second rule now reads, use only whale oil for illumination. Candlelight awakens those who sleep. The handwriting matches the original perfectly, yet I am certain the text has changed. More disturbing, I found candle wax under my fingernails and melted beeswax stains on my nightclothes, though I cleaned thoroughly before retiring. The stains form a pattern that resembles Sanskrit script, matching the symbols I observed on the ballroom door. Mr. Cranfield's examination of my quarters revealed the hidden bells immediately. He gathered them with obvious distress, his hands shaking as he counted 27 in total. They mark you for the calling, he whispered. Each violation makes you more receptive to instruction. He paused at my chamber door to add, the house is teaching you to serve properly. Do not resist the lessons, or they will become more direct. The whale oil in my lantern has taken on a reddish tint, and the flame now burns with the same unnatural intensity I observed in the candlelight. When I patrol tonight, the shadows my lantern casts show additional figures walking beside me, the previous keepers, slowly manifesting as my transformation progresses. October 18th, 1869. Rule 5 challenged. Lady Margaret appeared, and I nearly spoke. The portrait of Lady Margaret has begun migrating throughout the palace, appearing in different rooms each night despite weighing at least 50 pounds in its ornate frame. Last night, I observed its progression firsthand, and what I witnessed challenges every assumption about the nature of painted images. During my 10 o'clock inspection of the dining room, the portrait hung in its usual position above the head chair. Lady Margaret appeared exactly as before, a woman of perhaps 30 years in an emerald dress, with pale blue eyes that seemed aware but static. However, when I returned to the dining room at midnight, the portrait had vanished entirely, leaving only a darker rectangle on the wallpaper where it had hung. I discovered it 20 minutes later in the music room, positioned above the pianoforte, where no portrait had been before. The painting itself appeared identical, but Lady Margaret's expression had subtly altered. Her mouth now held the beginning of a smile, and her eyes seemed to track my movement with more obvious intelligence. Most disturbing, the portrait was warm to the touch, as though the painted figure generated body heat. When I examined the surface closely, I could discern the faint impression of breathing, the emerald dress rising and falling almost imperceptibly, painted fabric that seemed to respond to invisible lungs. At 2 o'clock, I found the portrait in the library, hung between bookcases in a space too narrow for its frame. Lady Margaret's smile had broadened considerably, and her painted hand, which had previously rested on a table, now pointed directly toward a specific volume on the shelf behind me. The indicated book was Marriages and Deaths of Thornwick Parish, 1830 to 1860. Within its pages, I discovered the truth about Lady Margaret Ellingwood. She had not died in childbirth as Mr. Cranfield claimed, but had drowned herself in the cove below the palace 3 days after giving birth. The infant had vanished the same night, leading to speculation that she had taken the child with her into the waves. More significantly, the record showed that Lady Margaret had been married to Thomas Whitmore, the first night keeper of Thornwick Palace, employed from 1837 until his disappearance in 1849. Their wedding photograph, preserved between the book's pages, showed a woman identical to the portrait and a man bearing my exact features. As I read these records, I became aware of breathing behind me, not the subtle movement of painted fabric, but the deep, measured respiration of a living person. When I turned, Lady Margaret stood 3 feet away, no longer confined to her frame, but present in the library as a translucent figure in emerald silk. Water dripped from her dress and hair, forming puddles on the carpet that reflected not the library's contents, but images of the seaside cove at night. She opened her mouth to speak, and I found myself leaning forward, desperate to hear her words despite the explicit warning in the 5th rule. "Thomas," she began, her voice carrying the sound of distant waves, "you must remember what we—" I clamped my hands over my ears and fled the library, but her voice followed me through the corridors. "The bell calls us home, Thomas, as it called you before, as it will call you again." When I reached my quarters, I discovered my reflection in the nailed mirror showed not my current appearance, but my face aged by decades and bearing the translucent quality I had observed in Lady Margaret. Behind my reflection stood other figures, previous Thomas Whitmores, all watching with expressions of patient anticipation. This morning, the portrait had returned to the dining room, but Lady Margaret's expression now showed complete joy, as though she had achieved some long-sought goal. Water stains beneath the frame suggest she had physically walked through the palace during the night, leaving a trail from library to dining room. Mr. Cranfield's inquiry about my night's experiences was unusually direct. "Did you speak with her?" When I assured him I had remained silent, his relief was palpable, though he added ominously, "Silence delays the inevitable, but cannot prevent it. She will try again, and each attempt will be more compelling." I have discovered additional records in the butler's pantry. Employment documents for 17 different Thomas Whitmores, each serving as night keeper for exactly 12 years before vanishing without trace. The pattern suggests not coincidence, but deliberate selection, as though the position requires not just any Thomas Whitmore, but the same Thomas Whitmore, returning again and again to fulfill some eternal obligation. The tiny bells in my possession have multiplied overnight, now numbering 63. They chime whenever Lady Margaret's portrait moves, creating a harmonious sound that grows more complex with each edition. I suspect they are marking my progress towards some final transformation, each bell representing another step in my preparation for whatever role the palace intends me to fulfill. October 19th, 1869. Rule 7 investigated. I accessed the bell room without touching the rope. The attic door remains chained and padlocked, but I discovered an alternative route through the servants' stairs that ascend beyond the 3rd floor to a maintenance hatch. The climb required navigating through decades of accumulated debris, broken furniture, discarded portraits, and most significantly, personal effects from previous keepers, spectacles, pocket watches, uniforms, and 17 identical journals, each bearing the name Thomas Whitmore. The bell chamber defied my expectations in every detail. The bronze bell itself stands nearly 8 feet tall, its surface covered in Sanskrit inscriptions that seem to shift and change when observed directly. The rope descends through a hole in the floor to the chained room below, but more troubling is the evidence of recent use. The hemp fibers show clear wear patterns, and the surrounding floorboards bear the impression of feet positioned for optimal leverage. Most disturbing is the ash. Every surface in the chamber, floor, walls, the bell itself, bears a thick coating of gray powder that clings to clothing and skin despite attempts to brush it away. When I examined the ash closely, I discovered it contains fragments of bone, cloth, and what appears to be human hair. The mixture suggests not simple cremation, but the systematic reduction of multiple bodies over an extended period. The ash responds to disturbance with unnatural behavior. When I accidentally scattered a small pile, the particles reorganized themselves into readable text. Ring, when ready, appeared clearly in the gray powder, formed by ash particles moving against the natural air currents in the chamber. I observed the rope's movement without touching it, maintaining careful distance as instructed by the 7th rule. At exactly 12:47 a.m., the rope began to sway rhythmically, as though pulled by invisible hands. The movement was too regular for wind, too purposeful for accident. Someone or something was testing the mechanism from below. As the rope swayed, I heard voices emanating from the ash-covered walls. Not external sounds, but words spoken from within the powder itself. Multiple voices, all bearing my inflection but aged differently, speaking in careful coordination. He observes correctly. The pattern remains unbroken. Soon he will understand the necessity. The bell remembers all who serve. These voices seem to emerge from the ash as though the powder itself contained the compressed remains of consciousness, the ground bones and cremated flesh of previous keepers, somehow retaining their ability to speak and observe. When I moved closer to examine the rope's attachment point, the swaying stopped immediately, and the ash began forming new words. "Not yet, Thomas, not yet." The powder continued reorganizing, creating a detailed map of the palace with specific areas marked in different symbols. My quarters marked with a bell, the dining room with a crown, and the hidden chamber beneath the ballroom with a symbol I did not recognize. I retreated without touching the rope, but the damage was done. Upon returning to my quarters, I discovered my journal had been altered again. A new entry appeared in my handwriting, though I have no memory of writing it. October 19th, 1869. I understand now. The bell does not ring to summon help. It rings to announce arrivals. Each keeper who serves adds his voice to the chorus that guides the next. We are all here, Thomas. We are all waiting for you to join us. The handwriting gradually shifts throughout this entry, beginning in my current script and evolving into the aged, trembling hand I have observed in the previous keeper's hidden journal. This morning, Mr. Cranfield's examination of my clothing revealed extensive ash contamination despite my careful attempts at cleaning. He gathered the gray powder with obvious reverence, sealing it in small glass vials that he labeled with dates spanning back 40 years. Each keeper contributes to the collection, he explained. The ash preserves essence, memory, personality, purpose. When the time comes, you will understand its significance. He paused to examine a particularly large sample. This ash remembers you, Thomas. It has been waiting for your return. I have discovered that the ash glows faintly in darkness, and when scattered on paper, it forms readable text without any conscious guidance. Last night, it wrote, "The bell rings when the circle is complete. 13 years since the last edition. The house grows impatient." The tiny bells now number exactly 108, a sacred number in Hindu tradition, according to the library's religious texts. They have arranged themselves in my trunk in a perfect spiral pattern, and their chiming has become constant, creating a low, harmonious tone that matches the frequency of the ash voices in the bell chamber. October 20th, 1869. Rule 6 violated. I uncovered the mirrors. The ash has begun appearing throughout the palace in quantities that suggest systematic distribution rather than natural accumulation. Each morning, I discover new deposits, thin lines beneath doors, spiral patterns on windowsills, and most disturbing, perfect handprints on mirrors throughout the building, as though someone with ash-covered palms has been touching every reflective surface in the palace. The pantry door, which has remained locked since my arrival, now leaks ash in a steady stream that pools in increasingly complex patterns. This morning, the gray powder had formed a detailed floor plan of the palace, complete with annotations in Sanskrit and English. The annotations marked specific locations with symbols I now recognize: bells for the keeper's quarters, crowns for areas of authority, and a new symbol, a mirror, marking 13 specific locations throughout the building. Curiosity overcame caution, and I followed the ash trail to each marked mirror. All 13 had been covered with black cloth, secured with iron nails driven deep into the surrounding walls. However, the ash handprints on the cloth suggested that something had been attempting to remove these coverings from behind the mirrors themselves. At the largest mirror, a full-length glass in the master bedroom, I discovered that the cloth had been partially pulled away, revealing a corner of the reflective surface. When I peered through this gap, I saw not the bedroom, but a different location entirely: the bell chamber, viewed from below, as though I stood in the chained room beneath the tower. In this reflected view, I observed multiple figures in keeper uniforms standing around the bell rope, all bearing my face but showing different ages and states of preservation. They moved with coordinated precision, each taking turns pulling the rope in a complex pattern that produced no sound from the actual bell above my head. The sight was so compelling that I removed the covering entirely, exposing the full mirror. The reflected bell chamber became completely visible, revealing details I had not observed during my physical visit. The Sanskrit inscriptions on the bell were clearly readable in the reflection, and I could see that the ash on the chamber floor had been arranged in a perfect mandala pattern with the rope at its center. Most disturbing, one of the reflected figures, the newest addition to their ranks, noticed my observation and approached the mirror from within the reflection. When he reached the glass surface, he pressed his palms against it from the inside, creating the ash handprints I had observed throughout the palace. "Thomas," he spoke, his voice emanating from the mirror itself. "You see us as we truly are. The house has been teaching you to perceive properly." The other figures gathered behind him, all speaking in harmonious chorus. "The bell will ring for you tonight. Be ready to answer." I attempted to replace the cloth covering, but my hands moved without conscious control, removing the coverings from additional mirrors instead. With each exposure, new views became visible. The dining room showing Lady Margaret seated at the head table with previous keepers arranged in proper order, the library revealing shelves filled with journals documenting centuries of supernatural service, and most terrifying, my own quarters showing my sleeping form surrounded by translucent figures who watched with protective interest. By dawn, I had uncovered all 13 mirrors, creating a network of views into the palace's supernatural reality. The mirrors now function as windows into a parallel version of Thornwick, where the dead continue their duties alongside the living, maintaining traditions and protocols that span generations. This morning, Mr. Cranfield's reaction to the uncovered mirrors was immediate and severe. He attempted to recover them, but the black cloth disintegrated at his touch, crumbling to ash that joined the ever-growing accumulations throughout the palace. "You have accelerated the process," he whispered, his voice carrying the hollow quality I had observed in the bell chamber voices. "The barriers between states of service have become permeable. Tonight will bring the final lesson." I noticed that Mr. Cranfield's reflection in the newly uncovered mirrors showed him as he truly exists, a figure preserved in the same translucent state as the previous keepers, maintaining his duties long past the cessation of normal life. He is not the living butler who hired me, but a supernatural guardian who has guided countless Thomas Whitmores through their transformation. The ash continues to accumulate at an exponential rate, and I have observed that it responds to my presence by forming words and symbols of increasing complexity. This evening, it spelled out a complete message. The bell rings at midnight. The circle closes. Thomas Whitmore comes home. The tiny bells now fill my quarters entirely, covering every surface in perfect geometric arrangements. Their constant chiming has synchronized with my heartbeat, creating a rhythm that seems to draw me toward the bell tower with each passing hour. October 21st, 1869. The bell rang for the first time. At precisely midnight, the bronze bell in the tower produced a single, resonant tone that seemed to originate not just from the bell itself, but from every metallic surface in the palace. The sound was deeper than any physical bell could produce, resonating through stone foundations and timber beams until the entire structure vibrated in harmony. I was conducting my patrol in the Great Hall when the tone began, and its effect was immediate and transformative. Every mirror in the palace blazed with sudden light, revealing the supernatural residents in their full manifestation. Lady Margaret stepped directly from her portrait, no longer translucent, but solid and present, wearing her emerald dress now dry and immaculate. "Thomas," she said, her voice carrying the authority of long-established command, "the time for lessons has ended. You understand now what we require." Behind her, previous keepers materialized from the ash that coated every surface, each one gaining substance and presence as the bell's tone continued. They arranged themselves in a formal procession, all bearing my face but showing the effects of their years of service, some appearing recently deceased, others showing the preserved perfection of supernatural existence. The newest addition to their ranks approached me directly. His uniform was identical to mine, and his face bore my exact features, but aged by decades of otherworldly service. "I am Thomas Whitmore," he said. "As you are, as we all are. The name is not coincidence, but designation. We are the same soul, returning again and again to fulfill our eternal obligation to Thornwick." He gestured toward the bell tower, where the rope now descended through the great hall ceiling, defying the palace's physical architecture. "The bell calls us to our duties, Thomas. Each toll marks another keeper ready to join our ranks. Tonight, you complete your preparation." Lady Margaret stepped forward, extending one pale hand. "Our marriage was consecrated 40 years ago, Thomas. Each time you return to us, we renew these vows. The palace requires both a keeper and a lady, husband and wife, to maintain the balance between life and death." As she spoke, I felt my resistance dissolving. The tiny bells that filled my quarters began chiming in perfect harmony with the tower bell, creating a sound that penetrated every thought and emotion. My memories of life before Thornwick faded, replaced by fragments of previous lives, dozens of incarnations as Thomas Whitmore, each serving 12 years before transformation and renewal. I remembered my first death in 1849, drowning in the cove below the palace while trying to save our infant child. I recalled my resurrection 3 days later, preserved by Hindu funeral rites Lord Ellingwood had learned during his colonial service. I understood finally that the position was not employment, but a form of spiritual reincarnation. My soul bound to Thornwick through supernatural marriage vows that transcended individual lifetimes. The The procession of previous keepers moved toward the bell rope, each one taking their turn to pull the mechanism. With each toll, the palace transformed further, revealing its true nature as a nexus between the world of the living and the realm of the preserved dead. The rooms filled with supernatural servants, all maintained in eternal service through the same preservation rituals that had sustained the keepers. "Pull the rope, Thomas," Lady Margaret commanded. "Ring the bell to announce your readiness. Join us willingly and retain your individual consciousness. Resist and be absorbed into the collective without identity or memory." I approached the rope as though in a dream, my hands moving without conscious control. The hemp felt warm and alive, pulsing with the heartbeats of every keeper who had grasped it before me. As I pulled downward, the bell produced a tone that seemed to echo from within my own chest, announcing to whatever supernatural authorities governed such transitions that Thomas Whitmore was ready for his next phase of service. The transformation began immediately. I felt my consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of individual flesh, connecting to the collective memory of every Thomas Whitmore who had served before me. My body began taking on the preserved perfection I had observed in the other keepers, flesh that appeared living, but no longer required sustenance, breath, or rest. Yet unlike the previous transformations, this time I retained complete awareness of the process. I could feel my individual personality merging with the accumulated wisdom and experience of 40 years of supernatural service, becoming both myself and something far greater than any single human consciousness. October 22nd, 1869. Rule 4 revealed: when the bell rings, you must ring it again. Using the ash and oil solution discovered in my predecessor's hidden notes, I successfully revealed the scratched fourth rule. The chemical reaction produced text that glowed with pale blue light. When the bell rings, you must ring it again. Each keeper calls the next. This rule explains the cyclical nature of employment at Thornwick. The bell does not ring randomly or through supernatural intervention. It is pulled by the previous keeper to announce when his replacement is ready for transformation. Each Thomas Whitmore serves 12 years in physical form before transitioning to supernatural existence, at which point he must call the next incarnation of himself to continue the cycle. Last night, the implications became terrifyingly clear. At 1 o'clock, I heard footsteps on the roof above my quarters, followed by the sound of someone climbing the outside of the bell tower. The footsteps were immediately recognizable. My own gait, wearing my own boots, moving with the purpose I had developed during 2 weeks of nightly patrols. A voice called down from the tower. My voice, but aged and hollow. "Thomas Whitmore, your predecessor requests audience. The changing of the guard requires formal protocols." I remained in my quarters, remembering the warning about answering supernatural calls, but the voice continued with increasing authority. "Thomas, you misunderstand. I am not calling you to come out. I am calling you to come up. The bell tower awaits your voluntary ascent." The distinction was crucial. Rule 4 did not forbid responding to calls from previous keepers. It required such response. The bell must be pulled by each keeper in turn, creating an unbroken chain of spiritual succession that maintains Thornwick's supernatural functions. As the calling continued, I felt the same compulsive urge I had experienced during Lady Margaret's appearances, but stronger and more focused. This was not mere supernatural influence, but the recognition of legitimate authority. My predecessor had every right to summon me for the completion of my duties. I found myself climbing the servants' stairs to the bell chamber, though I do not remember deciding to move. My predecessor waited beside the bell rope, wearing a uniform identical to mine, but bearing the stains and wear of supernatural service. His face was my face, but marked by decades of otherworldly experience. "Thomas," he said, "you understand now why the fourth rule was scratched out. New keepers must discover this truth through experience rather than instruction. The compulsion to ring the bell cannot be resisted. It can only be accepted willingly or suffered involuntarily." He gestured toward the rope, which now seemed to glow with internal light. "Each keeper must call his replacement when the time comes. I pulled this rope to summon you 12 years ago, as my predecessor pulled it to summon me 40 years past. Tonight, you will pull it to summon your next incarnation." The logic was inescapable. Thomas Whitmore would continue to serve Thornwick until the sea claimed the land and the land claimed the sky. Each incarnation would serve his 12 years, transform into supernatural existence, and call forth the next version of himself to continue the eternal duties. "But why 12 years?" I asked. "Why not shorter or longer periods?" My predecessor smiled with the patience of accumulated wisdom. 12 years allows sufficient time for proper training and spiritual preparation. Shorter terms produce keepers who resist the transformation. Longer terms risk the keeper developing attachments to mortal existence that complicate the transition. He placed one cold hand on my shoulder. "You have been an excellent student, Thomas. Your violations of the rules were necessary lessons, each one preparing you for this moment. The house itself guided your education, ensuring you would understand the true nature of your employment before accepting your permanent position." I grasped the rope without further hesitation. The hemp felt warm and alive, pulsing with the accumulated energy of every keeper who had pulled it before me. As I drew it downward, the bell produced a tone that seemed to echo across time itself, not just announcing my transformation, but calling forth my next incarnation from whatever realm souls inhabit between lives. The sound resonated through dimensions I could not previously perceive, and in its echo, I heard the response. A distant bell ringing from 12 years in the future, pulled by the Thomas Whitmore, who would replace me when my supernatural service was complete. My predecessor nodded with satisfaction. "The cycle continues unbroken. Welcome to your eternal employment, Thomas Whitmore." As the bell's tone faded, I felt my consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of individual existence, becoming part of something far larger and more permanent than any single human life. October 23rd, 1869. I am no longer alone in pulling the rope. My transformation progressed rapidly, following the previous night's bell ringing. I now exist in a state between life and death that allows me to perceive both the physical palace and its supernatural reality simultaneously. During tonight's patrol, I observed my duties from an entirely new perspective. At precisely midnight, I ascended to the bell chamber, not as a curious trespasser, but as a keeper fulfilling his designated function. The rope now responds to my touch, as though it recognizes legitimate authority, and when I pull it, the bell produces tones of specific meaning. Different sequences communicate different messages to the supernatural hierarchy that governs such establishments. Tonight, I rang the bell 3 times in measured sequence, once to announce the completion of my training, twice to confirm my acceptance of eternal service, and thrice to request formal induction into the Brotherhood of Keepers. Each toll echoed across vast distances, answered by corresponding bells from similar establishments throughout the British Isles. I am not alone in this work. Thornwick is one of 13 such facilities, each staffed by preserved souls who maintain the barriers between the living and the dead. We are soldiers in a war the living cannot comprehend, defending their world against forces that would consume it entirely. As I pulled the rope, my predecessor materialized beside me, no longer appearing as a separate individual, but as another aspect of my own eternal identity. "You understand now, Thomas," he said. "We are not different people, but the same soul serving in different phases of existence. Each incarnation builds upon the wisdom and experience of those before." Behind him appeared additional figures, every Thomas Whitmore who had served Thornwick, stretching back to the palace's construction. They were all me, showing different ages and stages of spiritual development, but united in purpose and identity. "The living Thomas serves 12 years to learn proper procedures," explained the eldest figure, bearing my face but aged by decades of supernatural experience. "The transformed Thomas serves eternally to implement those procedures. Together, we maintain Thornwick's function as a fortress against the chaos that exists beyond death." I observed the truth of this as my perception expanded further. Beyond the physical palace lay realms of supernatural activity that constantly pressed against the boundaries of the living world. Thornwick stood as a stronghold against these forces, maintained by the combined will and experience of its eternal staff. Lady Margaret appeared in the chamber, no longer a visitor, but revealed as the commanding officer of our supernatural garrison. "Thomas," she said, "your marriage vows bind you not just to me, but to this sacred duty. We are guardians of the threshold, ensuring that only approved souls pass between the realms of life and death." She gestured toward windows that had not existed moments before, revealing views of the supernatural landscape that surrounds Thornwick. Vast armies of the unquiet dead pressed against barriers maintained by our will and vigilance, seeking entry to the world of the living, where they could wreak havoc beyond imagination. "Each keeper adds his strength to our defenses," Lady Margaret continued. "Your 12 years of mortal service prepared you to understand the magnitude of this responsibility. Now you will serve until the end of time itself, protecting those who cannot protect themselves." I felt the weight of this obligation settling into my transformed consciousness, and found it not burdensome, but fulfilling. This was the purpose for which Thomas Whitmore had been created, not a man seeking employment, but a soul designed specifically for this eternal service. As dawn approached, I completed my final patrol as a living keeper. Tomorrow night, I will begin my duties as a supernatural guardian, joining the ranks of previous Thomas Whitmores in defending Thornwick against forces that exist beyond human comprehension. The tiny bells that have accumulated in my quarters now serve their true purpose. They are communication devices, allowing coordination between the various aspects of my eternal identity. When I ring them in specific patterns, my previous incarnations respond with guidance and assistance, ensuring that no knowledge or experience is ever lost. I understand now why the position required someone named Thomas Whitmore. It was never about finding the right person for the job. It was about calling the right soul back to continue his eternal work. October 24th, 1869, 3:33 a.m. The circle is complete. The bell rings for the next. I write this final entry with hands that no longer require warmth or rest, in a form that transcends the limitations of mortal flesh. My transformation reached completion at midnight, when Lady Margaret and I renewed our eternal marriage vows in a ceremony that united us not just as husband and wife, but as co-commanders of Thornwick's supernatural garrison. The preservation chamber revealed its true purpose during the ceremony. The glass cases I had observed contain not the bodies of previous keepers, but the physical vessels we inhabited during our years of mortal service. Each Thomas Whitmore's earthly form is maintained in perfect condition, ready to be reoccupied should the need arise for interaction with the living world. My own body now rests in the 24th case, breathing slowly in a state between life and death, while my consciousness operates in its transformed state. I can return to physical form when necessary, but my true existence now transcends such limitations. Lady Margaret explained the complete scope of our responsibilities as the ceremony concluded. Thomas, we do not merely guard against supernatural incursion. We regulate the flow of souls between life, death, and what lies beyond. Every person who dies within 50 miles of Thornwick must be processed through our facility, evaluated for their destination, and guided to their proper realm. The dining room's 13 place settings now make perfect sense. 12 seats accommodate the jury of previous Thomas Whitmores who evaluate each soul's worthiness, while the 13th seat hosts the soul under judgment. Lady Margaret presides over these proceedings, using her authority as one who died and returned to determine appropriate spiritual destinations. Most souls proceed to their natural rest without complication, but others require more complex handling. Some resist their death and must be compelled to accept judgment. Others carry such evil that they must be contained rather than released. A few possess such purity that they are recruited for supernatural service like our own. The bell system coordinates all these functions. Different sequences of rings communicate with supernatural authorities throughout the British Isles, reporting our decisions and requesting guidance for complex cases. The bell's voice carries across dimensions that normal humans cannot perceive, maintaining communication with realms that exist beyond physical reality. Tonight, I rang the bell in the sequence that announces readiness to receive a new living keeper. Somewhere in the world, a man named Thomas Whitmore felt an inexplicable compulsion to answer an advertisement for night keeper at Thornwick Palace. He will arrive within the fortnight, beginning his own 12-year journey toward transformation and eternal service. I feel no sadness at the conclusion of my mortal existence. This transformation represents not an ending, but a graduation to responsibilities that dwarf anything I could have accomplished as a living man. I am now part of a spiritual hierarchy that maintains the cosmic order itself, ensuring that death and life remain in proper balance. The ash that accumulates throughout the palace serves as a communication medium, allowing instant contact between all aspects of our eternal identity. When I scatter it in specific patterns, I can speak with Thomas Whitmores from centuries past and decades future, coordinating our efforts across time itself. My predecessor, now revealed as another aspect of my own soul, provides constant guidance as I learn my new duties. The living Thomas gathers information and learns procedures, he explained. The transformed Thomas implements those procedures with perfect knowledge and unlimited time. Together, we ensure that Thornwick's mission continues without interruption. I have discovered that our work extends far beyond this single palace. The 13 facilities scattered across the British Isles form a network of supernatural strongholds, each maintained by preserved souls who have accepted eternal service. We coordinate our efforts to maintain barriers that protect the entire empire from forces that would destroy not just individual lives, but the very concept of civilization. Lady Margaret has shown me the true scope of these threats. Beyond death lie realms of chaos where consciousness exists without form or purpose, eternally hungry for the structure and meaning that define the living world. Only constant vigilance by souls like ourselves prevents these forces from breaking through to consume everything humans have built. The handwriting changes, becoming more formal and official. Position of Night Keeper now available at Thornwick Palace. Suitable candidate must be named Thomas Whitmore. Previous experience unnecessary. Spiritual fortitude essential. 12-year commitment required, with opportunity for permanent advancement. Current staff includes 24 Thomas Whitmores serving in various capacities, plus Lady Margaret Ellingwood as commanding officer. Excellent working conditions, comprehensive training, and eternal job security guaranteed. Apply to Mr. Cranfield at Thornwick Palace. No references required for properly named candidates. The bell has not rung for 7 days. When it rings again, it will call the next Thomas Whitmore to begin his journey toward eternal service. He will come willingly, as we all do, drawn by forces beyond mortal understanding, to fulfill our cosmic purpose. We are always recruiting. The work is endless, the responsibility absolute, and the satisfaction beyond mortal comprehension. Thomas Whitmore serves until the stars burn out and the universe itself requires our final judgment.